بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الله ملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن عليا ولي الله أشهد أن عليا حجة الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح حي على خير العمل حي على خير العمل الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله
صل على محمد.
الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن عليا ولي الله أشهد أن عليا حجة الله هيا على الصلاة هيا على الصلاة هيا على الفلاح هيا على الفلاح هيا على خير العمل هيا على خير العمل قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه الله أكبر بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل أعوذ برب الفلق من شر ما خلق ومن شر غاسق إذا وقب ومن شر النفاثات في العقد ومن شر حاسد إذا حسد الله أكبر سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده رب صل على محمد وآل محمد سمع الله لمن حمده الله أكبر سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربينا الأعلى وبحمده رب صل على محمد وآل محمد الله أكبر أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه الله أكبر سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربينا الأعلى وبحمده رب صل على محمد وآل محمد الله أكبر بحول الله بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد كذلك الله ربي الله أكبر اللهم اغفر لنا وارحمنا وعافنا واعف عنا في الدنيا والآخرة إنك على كل شيء قدير الله أكبر سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده رب صل على محمد وآل محمد سمع الله لمن حمده الله أكبر سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده رب صل على محمد وآل محمد الله أكبر أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه الله أكبر سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده رب صل على محمد وآل محمد الله أكبر الحمد لله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد بحول الله وقوته سبحان الله سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله أستغفر الله ربي الله أكبر سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده رب صل على محمد وآل محمد سمع الله لمن حمده الله أكبر سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده رب صل على محمد وآل محمد الله أكبر أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه الله أكبر سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده يا لطيف ارحم عبدك الضعيف الذليل بجاه محمد وآل بيته الطاهرين الله أكبر الحمد لله بسم الله وبالله وخير الأسماء لله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا شديد القوى ويا شديد المحال، يا عزيز يا عزيز يا عزيز، ظلت بعظمتك جميع خلقك، فاكفني شر خلقك. يا محسن يا مجمل، يا منعم يا مفل، يا لا إله إلا أنت، سبحانك إني كنت من الظالمين. فاستجبنا له ونجيناه من الغم، وكذلك ننجي المؤمنين. وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين.
الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن عليا ولي الله أشهد أن عليا حجة الله. هيا على الصلاة هيا على الصلاة هيا على الفلاح هيا على الفلاح هيا على خير العمل هيا على خير العمل. قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربينا أعلى وبحمده رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربينا أعلى وبحمده رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. بحول الله. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. كذلك الله ربي. الله أكبر. ربنا اغفر لي ولوالدي وللمؤمنين يوم يقوم الحساب. رب ارحمهما كما ربياني صغيرا. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربينا أعلى وبحمده رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر. أستغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربينا أعلى وبحمده رب صل على محمد وآل محمد. Allahu Akbar. Alhamdulillah. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lah. Ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Bihawlillah. Subhanallah. 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 Astaghfirullah Rabbi. Allahu Akbar. Subhan Rabbiyal Azim wa bihamdih. Rabbi salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Sami Allahu liman hamidah. Allahu Akbar. Subhanallah, Subhanallah, Subhan Rabbiyal A'la wa bihamdih. Rabbi salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Allahu Akbar. Astaghfirullah Rabbi wa atubu ilayh. Allahu Akbar. Subhanallah, Subhanallah, Subhan Rabbiyal A'la wa bihamdih. Rabbi salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Allahu Akbar. Bihawlillah. Subhanallah. Astaghfirullah Rabbi. Allahu Akbar. Subhan Rabbiyal Azim wa bihamdih. Rabbi salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Sami Allahu liman hamidah. Allahu Akbar. Subhanallah, Subhanallah, Subhan Rabbiyal A'la wa bihamdih. Rabbi salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Allahu Akbar. Astaghfirullah Rabbi wa atubu ilayh. Allahu Akbar. Subhanallah, Subhanallah, Subhan Rabbiyal A'la wa bihamdih. Ya waliyal afiyah, nas'aluka al-afiyah, afiyat ad-dunya wal akhirah. Bijay Muhammadin wa ali baytihi at-tahirin. Allahu Akbar. Alhamdulillah. Bismillahi wa billahi wa khairul asma'i lillah. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lah. Wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Assalamu alayka ayyuhan nabiyyu wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
محمد وآل محمد صلوات. بسم الله الرحمن الرحیم. بحق ابا عبداللہ الحسین. अपना मुझे भाइयों बहनों बच्चाओं बीमार होए अपने दुआ करे कि अल्लाह आलो का बद्दाई ने शफा दे, बद्दाई नी तकलीफ़ों दूर थाए. अपना आलिमो मर्जा मोमिनीन ने मोमिनात दुनिया में जहाँ भी होए, या अल्लाह तो अलका हिफ्ज़ व अमान में रख, हमारी बदी हाजतों पूरी कर, हमारा इल्म वदाड़ू कर. एवी दुआ साथे आपणे बद्दा साथे 5 फेरे अमजुजीब पढ़िए. औज़ु बिल्लाहि मिनश शैतानिर रजीम. बिस्मिल्लाहिर रहमानिर रहीम. अम्मन युजीबुल मुस्तर्रा इज़ा दअाहु व यक्शिफुस सू. 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 सूरह फातिहा शिफाउल मर्ज़ व दफ़्इल बला.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا شديد القوى ويا شديد المحال، يا عزيز يا عزيز يا عزيز، ظلت بعظمتك جميع خلقك، فاكفني شر خلقك. يا محسن يا مجمل، يا منعم يا مفضل، يا لا إله إلا أنت، سبحانك إني كنت من الظالمين. فاستجبنا له ونجيناه من الغم، وكذلك ننجي المؤمنين. وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين.
Recite oral lesson of Quran.
पर मोहम्मद वाले मोहम्मद सलावत أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إذا السماء انفطرت وإذا الكواكب انتثرت وإذا البحار فجرت وإذا القبور بعثرت علمت نفس ما قدمت وأخرت يا أيها الإنسان ما غرك بربك الكريم الذي خلقك فسواك فعدلك في أي صورة ما شاء ركبك كلا بل تكذبون بالدين وإن عليكم لحافظين كراما كاتبين يعلمون ما تفعلون إن الأبرار لفي نعيم وإن الفجار لفي جحيم يصلونها يوم الدين وما هم عنها بغائبين وما أدراك ما يوم الدين ثم ما أدراك ما يوم الدين يوم لا تملك نفس لنفس شيئا والأمر يومئذ لله صدق الله العلي العظيم اللهم صل وسلم وزد وبارك على رسول الله وآله الأطهار على رسول الله وآله الأطهار سورة المباركة الفاتحة.
That was our young Muhammad Ali Khimji. Can we have a loud salawat, please? Muhammad wa ala Muhammad salawat. Announcements. Saturday 10th of September, eve of 14th of Jaffer, 1444. Baraza Kono presents a gents and ladies question and answer with Sheikh Anwer Jaffer tonight after the main program in the main hall. Tomorrow, Sunday 11th of September, ladies morning Majlis at 10 a.m. with Quran Majlis in English and Gujarati by Sister Shirin Bai Tejani. Main program will start at 7:45 p.m. with Salatul Maghribain, Majlis by Sheikh Anwer Jaffer. Hujjat is hosting with Al Hadi Youth a 10-minute Instagram live series every Arbain night at 11 p.m. titled Reminders and Reflections to Take from Karbala. Today's speaker is Sister Farzana Karawalli, and her topic is Understand Our Negativities and Why We Struggle to See Beauty in the Way Lady Zainab alayha salam did. Allah. Follow the KSIMC Instagram page to join tonight's Instagram Live, which will start promptly at 11 p.m. All are welcome to attend. Weekend Fajr Namaz program starts on Sunday, 18th of September, that is next week Sunday, 18th of September at 6 a.m. with Jamaat Namaz, followed by a lecture by Maulana Kalbi Abbas Sahib, Surah Yasin, Ziyarat, Tabarruk or Niyaz. Koyaj census is live and available online. Many of us have already submitted, but not all. please take a moment and go through our website or COAGE website directly and have your say, so that the community needs are heard and appropriate actions are taken for our future. Brothers, think back to our youth. Who taught you fiqh, tariq, akhlaq, and Quran? Now think about what you are doing to teach the next generation. Hujjat Saturday Workshop is looking for a male volunteer aged 16 plus who can give at least 1 hour on a Saturday morning to help teach the next generation. Teacher training and support will be provided. Please speak to Ali Bai at the treasurer desk in the main hall after the main program for further information. We have launched our emergency Pakistan flood appeal to help those suffering with floods in Pakistan. The WF aid team is on the ground serving those in need. Please donate via our website or at the treasury desk. Recitation requests can be emailed to recite@hujjat.org. Niyaz fund is open. Please donate generously at the treasury desk. Those parking in the rugby, please pay £1 at the Jamaat desk. There are 2 more announcements. That is one is there will be no rugby available for tomorrow ladies morning majlis. Please park inside the Hujjat Center. That is tomorrow morning majlis. No rugby available. And rugby car park closes at 10:30 tonight, 10:30 p.m. tonight. Please bring your car in the center if you are staying for question and answer session. Muhammad wa ala Muhammad salawat. Marcia.
صلوات على محمد وآل محمد. सुनाई किसने ये जिंदा मेलोरी सकीना सो रही है, सुनाई किसने ये जिंदा मेलोरी सकीना सो रही है, खुदा रा जोर से बोले न कोई सकीना सो रही है, सुनाए किसने तुम्हारे गोशवारे मिल गए हैं, दर जिंदान सारे खुल गए हैं, रिहाई मिल गई जाती हूँ घर को, रिहाई मिल गई जाती हूँ घर को, मगर सज्जाद की आवाज़ आई, सकीना सो रही है, सुनाई किसने जिंदा मेलोरी सकीना सो रही है, न अब मारेगा कोई भी तमाचे, न होंगे फिर से ये रुखसार नीले, गला बांधा न जाएगा रसन में, गला बांधा न जाएगा सन में। जो आया शिम्र तो उससे कहूँगी सकीना सो रही है। सुनाई किसने जिंदा में लोरी सकीना सो रही है। बनाने कब्र जब सज्जाद उठे तो वो ना दे अली दोहरा रहे थे। बंदे हाथों से चाह कब्र खोदे, बंदे हाथों से चाह कब्र खोदे। अचानक पाँव की जंजीर बोली सकीना सो रही है। सुनाई किसने जिंदा में लोरी सकीना सो रही है। कहाँ बानो ने उठो शाहज़ादी, हुई क्या बात क्यों मादर से रूठी। उठो बाबा कसर आया है बीबी, उठो बाबा कसर आया है बीबी। मगर जिंदान की हर दीवार बोली सकीना सो रही है। सुनाई किसने ये जिंदा में लोरी सकीना सो रही है। हुए जब शाम के साए भी गहरे, परिंदे चहचहाते जा रहे थे। कहाँ बानू ने ऐ उड़ते परिंदों, कहाँ बानू ने ऐ उड़ते परिंदों। सदाएं रोक लो कुछ देर अपनी सकीना सो रही है। सुनाए किसने जिंदा में लोरी सकीना सो रही है। अदब की जान ये रेहान देखो, बुलंद आवाज में हरगिज न बोलो। यहाँ तोहफा तेहा भी दीर परना, यहाँ तोहफा तेहा भी दीर परना। यहाँ आवाज हो जाए न ऊंची सकीना सो रही है। सुनाई किसने जिंदा में लोरी सकीना सो रही है। खुदारा जोर से बोले न कोई सकीना सो रही है मुहम्मदिन व आलि मुहम्मद सलवात।
محمد وآل محمد صلوات.
رحم الله من قرأ سورة الفاتحة. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع لذنوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا أبي القاسم محمد والصلاة والسلام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين إلى قيام يوم الدين. وفقنا الله وإياكم بعلم وعمل صالح إن شاء الله بذكر الصلاة على محمد وآل محمد. أما بعد فقد قال الله الحكيم في كتابه الكريم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وأخي هارون هو أفسه مني لسانا آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد. Respected elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Before we begin, or rather continue our discussions we've had in the past nights, looking at the sermon, the first elementary sentence that the Imam alayhi salam begins with when he confronts Yazid ibn Muawiyah within his courthouse. There are two perspectives that I want to mention, or two ideas that I want to present, and then we'll move on with the discussion. When you look at leadership as it is presented within the Holy Quran, it is a theological emphasis within our faith that leadership should go into the hands of the ma'soom. And there's a reason for that. And the reason for that is mentioned in the story of Nabi Sulaiman alayhi salam. Nabi Sulaiman, they say that he turned towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and he asked Allah, Ya Allah, give me a kingdom that no other nation has seen before. No other nation has seen a kingdom before me, and no other nation will see it after me. So a very unique kingdom that was exclusive to Nabi Sulaiman alayhi salam. Of course, the idea is that when the Imam reappears, the Imam will have same level of authority that Nabi Sulaiman had. It doesn't mean that Nabi Sulaiman had some greater authority than the Imam of our time, but that's a different discussion. So here Nabi Sulaiman asks a very specific dua, and it's of a very material nature. So what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does is He grants His supplication, He grants His dua. Now remember, when you compare Nabi Sulaiman to Nabi Dawood, there's a vast difference between the two. Nabi Dawood, being the father of Nabi Sulaiman, also had a very expansive kingdom, a very notable kingdom. And through it, he was able to establish Islam, he was able to establish justice, he was a judge himself, Nabi Dawood. So what was the difference between the kingdom of Sulaiman and the kingdom of Nabi Dawood? Well, Allah allowed him or gave him certain special favors that Nabi Dawood did not have. So one of them was the control of the jinns. Now why is this important, the control or the authority to control the jinns? Well, think about this. Allah, when He speaks about the power of Sulaiman, He says that we gave him control over the shayateen, we gave him control over the animals, but we also gave him control over the jinn. And then he mentions specifically in the verses, he says, what they did was they built, and there were divers. So two things that the jinns would do is that they would build and they would dive. Why is that significant? Well, if you look at our capacity as human beings, there's only so much that we can do because we are limited materially. Physically, we have certain capacities. Beyond that, we can't do anything else. The jinns don't have the same limitations as human beings. Now, of course, Nabi Sulaiman lived in an age that didn't have the technology to do certain things. For example, building skyscrapers. For example, craving out certain things from stone. All of these things, there were other limitations during that specific time. But again, the jinns don't have that same level of limitations that human beings do. They could rise. The Quran mentions that the jinns, up to a certain point, they could rise up to the heavens. In Surah Al-Jinn, if you refer to this, after the coming of certain prophet, Allah then took away this power from the jinns. So the jinns had the ability to ascend, and the jinns were given the ability to dive within the waters. So you can imagine that the kingdom of Sulaiman was so vast that he had great skyscrapers. They were able to do certain things that human beings weren't able to do. And they built a kingdom so notable that it was even recognized by the kings of their time, of that specific time. So you can imagine that the kingdom of Nabi Sulaiman was beautiful in its apparent nature. The significance of diving in the waters today, again, we have certain limitations. 95% of the oceans is still yet to be discovered because we can't handle the pressure deep down. But the jinns, again, they are not limited to that limitations or that capacity. So the jinns, they were able to go straight into the ocean floors, and they were able to take out the jewels and the pearls and all of the different treasures that you can only find there. And they would come and they would give it to Sulaiman. So the jewelry that Sulaiman had access to, no other king, no other queen had access to such jewelry. And so all of a sudden, the power and the authority of Nabi Sulaiman was enhanced incredibly. And the one who realized this was Bilqis. When she came to the kingdom of Nabi Sulaiman and she saw how powerful he was, she recognized this authority. Just by looking at the walls, just by looking at the cities, the way the houses were built, the way the parliament was built, for example, the way things were built, she knew deep down that this is not normal. And that reinforced the authority of Nabi Sulaiman. And of course, the jewelry that she was given as well, again, that reinforced that this is an authority which is unnatural. Just as how the magicians of Nabi Musa, when they challenged Nabi Musa, they recognized that this is beyond magic. You see, the layman, the people who are not part of that game, they don't realize this. For them, magic is magic. For them, a kingdom which is beautiful is just like any other kingdom. But those who are part of the game realize that there are different levels of it. Bilqis recognized the authority of Sulaiman. The magicians of Fir'aun recognized the power and the authority of Nabi Musa alayhi salam. Now, why does Nabi Sulaiman ask for a kingdom in specific? It's as if he is telling us, oh, by the way, Khawarizmi in his tafsir, he says that the miracle of Sulaiman was his kingdom. You know, every prophet has a miracle. The kingdom that was given to Nabi Sulaiman was his miracle. And through it, he was able to bring people towards the religion of Islam. Why did Sulaiman ask for a kingdom in specific? It was as if he is telling the people that only a ma'asum can handle such levels of authority. If a non-ma'asum was to have control of such authority, then greed would overpower him. With greed, there is corruption. With corruption, there is decadence of society. There's the degeneration of society. Only a ma'asum can be preserved from greed and all of the different vices. And through it, justice can be established. Now, when you translate this to the time of Imam Ali alayhi salatu wassalam, what happened in Saqifa, and of course what happened after, subsequently, when the Khilafah was taken away from him, this was of course madhlumiyya, because he was unable to enact his responsibilities to the people. The second perspective is that when you look at the lives of the Imam or the A'immat al-Athhar alayhim salam, you realize that they all had one responsibility. The core responsibility of the Imams is to preserve the message of Rasulullah. How that manifests differs, because remember, every generation of Imamah had certain specific issues that they had to deal with. They were placed under certain circumstances. They were, for example, some of them were imprisoned for the majority of their lives. Some of them had certain levels of political power, like Imam Rada alayhi salam. Some of them had flexibility, like Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, Imam Bakr alayhi salam. Some of them were, for example, completely ignored. Some of them were under house arrest and so on and so forth. Because they were placed under certain conditions does not suspend them from their responsibilities. They had to manipulate their environment and still enact their responsibilities. And how they did so was remarkable in itself, because they were able to understand the challenges of societies, they were able to work around the circumstances and the situations that they were placed in, and through it they were able to preserve the message and the authority of the Holy Prophet of Islam. When you look at Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, Allahumma salli ala. The fundamental issue that he came across was the issue of khilafah, the issue of government. It was taken away from him. Does that mean that now his responsibility to preserve the Quran and the message of the Holy Prophet was suspended? No. He manipulated the situation and he preserved it. He chose not to fight. He chose to serve or to be at the service of the khulafa. He helped them. And we have many records to show that Umar ibn al-Khattab used to refer to the Imam alayhi salam in various different areas and matters of the government. The Imam manipulated the situation to preserve the message of the Holy Prophet of Islam. Why didn't he fight? Well, because they were surrounded by different empires and they were at war with these empires. If there was a civil fight or a civil war within the Muslim Ummah, these empires would have just jumped on the Muslims and would have decimated the whole religion itself. It was best for him to stand back and to serve for the greater good. And that was to preserve the religion of Islam. Imam Hassan alayhi salam, when you look at his situation, Allahumma salli ala. The problem that he faced was the problem of fitna, civil wars. There was bloodshed. There was the rise of the Khawarij. When you read the history of the Khawarij were terrorists, basically, in simple terms. They had a common enemy just like the Shias, just like the followers of the Ahlul Bayt, and that was the Bani Umayyah. But the difference was that the Khawarij, anyone who got in their way, they would just kill. Whether it be women, children, villages were plundered. They would kill anyone that stood in their way. They were terrorists in the history, in the books of history. So you had all of these different levels of fitna. Imam Hassan alayhi salam responds by signing a peace treaty to create some form of peace within the Muslim Ummah. And through it, he was able to preserve the message of the Holy Prophet of Islam. Imam al-Hussein, salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi. When he saw that Yazid now took over the caliphate, he saw that it was his responsibility to preserve the religion of Islam through Karbala. So the whole saga of Karbala takes place. Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam, in his time, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. As an extension to the Imams before him, the community had now entered a state of moral and emotional and spiritual decline. There was bankruptcy from a moral perspective and there was bankruptcy from a spiritual perspective. And the Imam alayhi salam understood this, and as a leader, he found solutions to it as well. And one of the solutions that he proposed, and he absolutely, one of the solutions that he introduced to the people was the Sahifa, was through reviving the message of Islam from a very different perspective, and that was through dua. That's not all, by the way. Sahifa Sajjadiyya plays a very phenomenal role within our madhab, and I'll explain why. So he introduces Sahifa. Sahifa is a culmination of poetry infused with eloquence. Now, coming back to this particular sermon of Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam, when he confronts Yazid ibn Muawiyah, he says, "U'tina sitta." Allah has given us 6 things. Ilm, hilm, samaha. We spoke about this in the previous nights. He has given us knowledge, he has given us perseverance, and he has given us generosity to be benevolent with the people. And then he goes on to say, Allah has given us fasaha. Fasaha is eloquence. Allah has given us the power of eloquence. Allah has given us the power of articulation. Fasaha, if you want to understand what this means, it means that when you express something, you express it in the best way. without there being any error, without there being any mistakes. Fasaha is when you deliver the best of words in the right time. You know, sometimes you have an argument with someone, or a debate, or whatever it may be. And then later on, you ponder, you reflect, and you say to yourself, you know what, I should have said something else. I should have said this instead of this. It would have probably expressed my views better. Fasaha is when you express the right words, which correlates what's there in your mind. And it's the best possible words that you use at that specific time. That's the meaning of fasaha. Articulation with presentation of the right message. Those who have fasaha in the community, those who are articulate, those who are eloquent, those who have the proficiency of speech, naturally such individuals are revered in society. They will rise within the social circles and they're respected by the people around them. When you look, for example, at the Quran is a book of Allah and it is recognized as a miracle. Why is it considered to be a miracle? It's because the people of the time revered poetry, wasn't it? The people of the time revered poetry. And so the poets or the singers or the entertainers would compete with one another. When the Holy Prophet of Islam came and introduced the Holy Quran, it destroyed all of their capacities. The Quran introduced a whole different dimension of poetry. It introduced a whole different dimension of eloquence and rhetoric. And this is something that really left them speechless. Many of them even came towards the religion of Islam. Many of them refused to join the religion of Islam, but still recognized the eloquence of the Holy Quran. There's a beautiful verse in the Holy Quran where the Quraysh of Mecca, they said, why was this Quran not revealed to a person who is revered in both cities? A person who is respected in both cities, the city of Mecca and the city of Ta'if. Why was it revealed to a person like Muhammad, a shepherd, for example? It should be given to a person or people like us, the aristocrats of society. So deep down they realized the efficiency of the Quran, the power of the Quran. But they just couldn't handle the idea that it was given to a person like Rasulullah. So when you look at the whole concept of eloquence and rhetoric, it's a profound business even today. When you look at the music industry has been built up on poetry, isn't it? When you look at a particular track or music in itself, you have the beats and then you have the lyrics. The lyrics is a form of poetry, whether it be soothing words, whether it be aggressive, violent, whatever it may be. It's built on poetry. So even today in our contemporaneous types, poetry has a very profound role in nurturing society. At the time of the fourth holy Imam, or even before him, at the time of Yazid ibn Muawiyah, the use of music, the use of poetry was now being expanded. When you actually refer to the sources in history, they say music was very much vibrant in the Muslim community. Ibn Mas'ud, he says that when you look at Mecca and Medina, people used to listen to music, people used to sing and dance in public. There was a time when people had reverence towards the Sharia of Islam. But in the time of Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam and Abdul Malik al-Marwan and all his other oppositions, say music was very much part and parcel of society. Music was so much so that certain singers were being revered. They say that there was a singer by the name of Jamila. And Jamila, she was so much revered amongst the notables in society, and of course, even the lower classes of society. Every time she would leave or go anywhere, there would be a massive entourage behind her. There was a point in time when she went for Hajj. So she left the city of Medina and she went towards Hajj. She went towards Mecca. When she entered the boundaries of Mecca, or the borders of Mecca, there was a massive welcoming for her. There was a grand welcoming for her. The notables of the city came and they welcomed her. This was a singer. And people respected her. She came, she did her Hajj, she came back to the city of Medina again. The notables of Medina welcomed her back home. There was a singer by the name of Dahman. Very interesting personality. Dahman was, of course, a very profound singer and entertainer. They say that one day there was a feud between a Medinan and a Kufan. So they went to the court of law. The judge was Abdul Aziz al-Makhzumi. Now the Medinan had used Dahman as a witness to come and testify for something. So he came to the courthouse. The Iraqi, the Kufan, when he saw a Dahman, he recognized him. He turns to the judge, he says, but this is Dahman. He's an entertainer, he's a singer. And the judge replies, he says, so what? I know exactly who he is. Everyone knows who he is. From the notables of societies all down to the lower levels of society. Everyone knows who Dahman is. He says, yes, but he's a singer. And not only that, he teaches other people to sing as well. How can you use him as a source for testimony in the court of law? As in, it goes against the principles of the Holy Quran. The Quran, if you refer to Surah Al-Hujarat, إِن جَاءَكُمْ فَاسِقٌ بِنَبَإٍ فَتَبَيَّنْ, the Quran says. The Quran creates the standard. The Quran says if there is a person who is considered to be a fasiq, a person who violates the sanctity of Allah, the Sharia of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the audacity that they publicly sin, when they come and deliver a news to you, you have the job and the responsibility to investigate and see if they are correct. Allah creates the standard in the Holy Quran. A person who sins openly, you cannot take their word. Especially in the court of law, you have to investigate. And here you have someone like Abdul Aziz al-Makhzumi taking him as a form of a testimony. And then Abdul Aziz al-Makhzumi, he replies, he says to the Iraqi, to the Kufan, he says, listen, may Allah have mercy on you and He have mercy on us. We know exactly who Dahman is and I have chosen him to come and testify in the court of law. So music was very much rampant within the society. Imam al-Sajjad recognizes this. This is an issue. This is a challenge that he had to confront. And the solution to that was through Sahifa al-Sajjadiyya. Remember, music was based on poetry. Music was based on, predominantly based on poetry. Imam al-Sajjad gives an alternative. He presents the best of poetry. He presents dua, infused with spirituality, infused with morality, infused with words that no human being can properly describe. Even today, there are scholars who are baffled by the words of Sahifa al-Sajjadiyya. Those who see the eloquence in it, they write exegesis upon exegesis of Sahifa al-Sajjadiyya. You can find voluminous works just explaining the words that Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam uses. And the fact that scholars have spent time and effort to kind of extrapolate the words of Imam al-Sajjad tells you and I that there is some form of authority within these words. At the time of Mansur al-Dawaniki, and this continues towards the Abbasid Caliphate as well. Mansur al-Dawaniki, al-Abbasi, very interesting. They say he was a very stingy person. Yesterday we spoke about the stinginess of leaders, isn't it? Al-Mansur, he was very, very stingy. And he loved poetry. There's a few issues with this. They say that number one, he had a very sharp memory. So every time anyone would say something to him, he would memorize it. And he was very quick in memorizing. Secondly, he had a slave who would also memorize. So he would invite poets from all over the nation. They would come, they would enter the courthouse or his palace or whatever. They would then entertain him and they would recite poetry for him. When they would recite poetry for him, not only would he be able to memorize the poetry very, very quickly, but his slave would also memorize the poetry very quickly. So no one could plagiarize, number one, and no one could repeat poetry either. He would know very quickly. As a reward, what he would do is he would take the paper that this person has written the poem on, he would measure it, and then he would give the reward based on that measure. Now you can imagine how much a paper weighs, and how much the person would get in return. His hadiyah would be from the caliph. He was very stingy, he was very bakhil. There was a person by the name of Asma'i. He came, he delivered poetry. He was very upset to see how he was treated and how much his hadiyah was. So he tried to dupe Al-Mansur. What he does is he goes back home. He says, you know what, I'm going to carve poetry in wood. So he takes a very big, large chunk of wood, very heavy, and he starts to carve poetry in it. And he uses words and expressions in a very complex way, and he uses very unknown words, very uncommon words, and he makes it a very, very complex structure, very difficult to memorize. And then he comes disguised, he covers his face except for his eyes, presents to be a nomad from one of the tribes in the outskirts of Baghdad and so on and so forth, and then he enters the courthouse, the palace. Mansur invites him in, tells him to start reading. He reads it. Because of the complexity behind it, Mansur wasn't able to memorize it, nor was the slave girl. They were both baffled, they loved it. And then they said, okay, fine, you deserve to be rewarded. Give me the piece of paper that you've written your poem on. He says, I didn't have any paper, so I carved it on a piece of wood. And, you know, my camel outside is carrying this piece of wood, so if you allow me, I can go bring it for you. They brought the wood, they measured it. Mansur realizes he doesn't have enough money in Bayt al-Mal to repay him or to reward him. He turns to him, he says, well, hold on a second, are you Asma'i? So Asma'i had to go around and find loopholes to this whole game that Mansur had developed. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Going back to the authority of Sahifa Sajjadiyya, one of the things that we have to realize is the profundity of the words that are used by Imam Sajjad alayhi salam. The words which are infused with spirituality, morality, even intellect. It's an intellectual discussion that is being used by the Imam for the reader. It's very captivating and very engaging. Just the du'as that are mentioned within Sahifa is enough to know or recognize its authenticity. Now, unfortunately, what's happened in this day and age is that authenticity is the standards of authenticity is manipulated. There are people, for example, who will come forward and say, look, we have plethora of ahadith, and I will only accept that ahadith which are considered to be sahih. We have a narration, we have chain of narrators. If all of the chain of narrators and all of the narrators are sahih and authentic and strong and trustworthy, only then can I accept that particular narration. Well, these aren't standards that our scholars have accepted. So why is it standards that we demand, especially within this madhab? As if that's the case, if that's the standard that you've created, a lot of our madhab will be lost. Amongst them, the heritage that's been left behind by the A'immat al-Athar. When you look at Sahifa Sajjadiyya, majority or some of the, I would say, du'as, there's no chain behind it. Does that mean that it loses authenticity? Does that mean that it loses authority? Just the words itself will tell you the authority and the authenticity that this is from the Imam alayhi salam. I remember having a conversation with one of the youths, and we spoke about this, and I said to him, the standards that you've created, it's not rational, especially within our religion, especially within our madhab. He says, no, but it has to be that way. I said, well, what about Du'a Kumail? Du'a Kumail, the chain of narrators, is very much ambiguous. Does that mean that you leave aside Du'a Kumail? He says, yes, if that's the case, then yes. Why are we reading Du'a Kumail? That alone tells me that you've never read Du'a Kumail. The profundity of the words of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam in Du'a Kumail tells you how much profound it has on the spirituality of the human being. Even if you read it in Arabic or English, it is words that just attract you towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Those words alone tell you that these are from the A'immat al-Athar. Especially when you refer to the legacies of history and you recognize that the Imams were the most knowledgeable, the most eloquent. When you put all the pieces of the puzzle together, you recognize that Du'a Kumail must have come from Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, and not any other personality from his time. When you look at Sahifa Sajjadiyya, likewise. When you look at Nahj al-Balagha, likewise. There are certain sermons people will start raising questions. And in order to evade these questions, we say, no, but the chain of narrators for this particular sermon, it doesn't make sense. It's a bit ambiguous, so we reject it. Some sermons turn out to be a bit misogynistic, isn't it? And a scapegoat to that is, well, chain of narrators is a bit wishy-washy, so we'll just leave it aside. Sayyid al-Radi, when he compiles Nahj al-Balagha, he says the only primary principle as to why I'm compiling this book, or the standard of what I'm compiling, is to look at the eloquence of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. If the eloquence is something profound for me, it goes part of this collection. Otherwise, it won't be part of the collection. So he'll flick through, for example, a sermon worth 10 pages and he'll find a sentence and he will say that this sentence, in comparison to all the other sentences within this khutbah, it is far eloquent. And it goes within Nahj al-Balagha. Ibn Abi al-Hadid al-Mu'tazili has written a sharh of Nahj al-Balagha, the exegesis of Nahj al-Balagha. There's no book like it, by the way, when it comes to the explanations of the sermons of the Imam alayhi salam. He says, whilst I was researching Khutbah al-Shakshakiyya, a very profound sermon, but also very harsh. The Imam alayhi salam, the words that he uses to describe the Khulafa is very, very harsh. But he, as a Sunni, when he came towards the sermon, he said, I'm baffled. Because I've been taught that all of the Khulafa got along very well. They were all mates with one another. But then here Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam gives a whole different perspective. So he went to his teacher, Ibn Khashab. He sat down with his teacher. He said, look, I've come across Khutbah Shakshakiyah. Have a read. I can't come to the belief that this is from Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. His teacher reads Khutbah Shakshakiyah. He says, no, you're wrong. This is most definitely from Ali alayhi salam. He says, why? Maybe perhaps Sayyid al-Radhi has manipulated these words and associated or attributed to the Imam alayhi salam. He says, no, that's not possible. He says, why? He says, Sayyid al-Radhi was a master when it came to the Arabic language. He had mastery over the Arabic language. And I've read his poetry, I've read his poems, and I can tell you that this khutbah is far different in level. The intellectual discussion is far different than the poems or the works of Sayyid al-Radhi. These words are definitely from the Imam alayhi salam. He says, the kalam of Ali alayhi salam kal Quran. That the kalam of the Imam alayhi salam is just like the Quran. Now it's not to say that they are both of the equal level. That's not what the meaning is here. There's a vast difference between the language that's there within the Quran and the language of Nahjul Balagha. He says the reason why it's like the Quran is because the moment he begins the sermon, the middle of the sermon and the end of the sermon, there's absolute congruency. There is a good structure behind it. And it fits, everything plugs in. So Ibn Abil Hadid al-Mu'tazili, he recognizes that Nahjul Balagha is a phenomenal compilation associated with Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. We don't just need to refer to the chain of narrators. That's not what our religion has become, to try and authenticate certain things. Just the words itself would show that these are associated to the Imam alayhi salam. Amongst them was the famous marhum Ayatollah Muhsin al-Hakim. They say his level of his intellectual capacity was such, he would just read the hadith and he would tell you if it's from the Imam or not. As in, that's how much he'd studied the language of the A'immat al-Athhar. Without even reading, for example, the chain of narrators, just by the hadith, he'll tell you that this is from the Imam. Because the kalam of the Imam was very different compared to the kalam of the people in that time. When you look at the power of poetry, it's existed within the Arabian nation, within the Arabian peninsula from the very beginning. Those who had power over poetry, they were revered in society. But those who had even greater authority within the realms of poetry were the A'immat al-Athhar. As in, when you look at, for example, the educational system in Islam, the history of education, going back at least 6-7 centuries, during the time of Ibn Sina, during the time of Ghazali, there's a very interesting thought that's developed. And this is something that we can all utilize in our lives. Al-Ghazali, Ibn Sina, they were very much advocates of teaching children. And they specifically came forward and said that once the child hits the age of 6 or 7, that's when you start teaching them. Not before. And this is, of course, in relation to the hadith of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam when he speaks about the 777. He says the first 7 years, let them play. 7 second years, that's when you start to teach them. You teach them basic things like reading, writing, memorization of the Quran. You teach them some basic elements of Arabic grammar. You teach them mathematics, logic, all of these things at a basic level. But one of the things they emphasize on is poetry. It says make sure that they memorize poetry. Ibn Khaldun later on, now the history of Ibn Khaldun, famous Sunni scholar, very, very famous Sunni scholar, he comes centuries later. There was a shift in academia at his time. You see, academics at the time of the Prophet, for many centuries later, it was all orally transmitted. People would give majalis, they would have question and answer sessions, they would have seminars and so on and so forth, but it was orally transmitted. Nothing was written down, or very little was written down. Then there was a massive shift within the Muslim empire. The introduction of paper, publishing, books were now being published. So scholarship was now effectively being transmitted through textual sources. Ibn Khaldun was vehemently against using books to study. He said we have to go back to the roots of memorizing things, to share knowledge through oral transmission. They asked him why. He said, because you can't cut out the middlemen, and the middlemen were teachers. He said, you can't just pick up a book and read it and try and absorb information and call yourself a scholar. He says, you have to have some sort of a relationship with a scholar. But more importantly, he goes back to the profundity of memorization. He says, when you memorize certain things, you're nurturing your soul. That's profound. Where is knowledge stored? Is knowledge stored in the brain? The brain is an organ that processes, analyzes, assesses information. But the information is stored within the heart, within the qalb, within the soul. He said, when you memorize good things, you're nurturing your soul to be good. When you, of course, memorize certain bad things like music and lyrics and all of these rubbish that's now prevalent in our times, it says you're nurturing your soul in a different direction. It says memorization is a very key, powerful method to nurture the soul. When we go into the grave and Munkar and Nakir approaches us and they ask us all of these different questions, you think it's the brain that's going to answer. It's the soul of the human being that will answer. So if the facets of Islam is not embedded within the soul, we won't be able to answer. Memorization helps nurture the soul. And he says one of the best things to do is not only memorize the Quran, but memorize poetry as well. Because through lines of poetry, you can nurture a good person to be a very, very good person. You can establish principles within their lives. They can understand certain disciplines. There are very powerful spiritual, moral messages within lines of poetry. Now for us living in, for example, in an English world, the English world, the poetry within our language specifically is quite low compared to, for example, the Arab world or the Persian world, or for example, even within Urdu. But that shouldn't stop us from memorizing Arabic poems, or even Farsi poems, or even Urdu poems. The best, of course, solution that we have is Nahj al-Balagha. These small sayings and maxims of the Imam alayhi salam, if we were to memorize them and allow our children to memorize them alongside the Quran, it would change and nurture them on a spiritual level. And these are the words based on Ibn Khaldun. Imam al-Sajjad alayhi salam, when he now confronts Yazid ibn Muawiyah, he turns to Yazid and he speaks about the power of fasaha. He says, we have fasaha, you lack fasaha. We have the power of eloquence, and we can introduce that eloquence through poetry and through oratory power as well. Yazid ibn Muawiyah, when you look at his character, he was a very powerful poet himself. And he had the power of eloquence as well. It's just that he used it for evil. That's why he was able to capitalize his power within the Muslim Ummah. That's why many people followed him. Because number one, he had eloquence, and number two, he was a very good poet. Imam al-Sajjad, again, as a solution to his time, presents Sahifa. Poetry with eloquence, with oratory power. But he infuses it with good moral, spiritual values. Something that can nurture the Muslim Ummah. At times, you'd come across a leader who does not have oratory power. He doesn't have the eloquence to express his knowledge. And this is found, you can find many examples of this. One of the examples is the teacher of Shaheed Muhammad Baqir al-Sadr. Very famously, he presents a line when he speaks about his teacher, Sheikh al-Na'ini, rahmatullah alayhima. He says that our teacher al-Na'ini, his ilm was azim. His ilm was profound, like nothing I've ever seen. وَلَكِنْ بَيَانُهُ خَفِيفٌ. His expression, his articulation was weak. He wasn't able to articulate his knowledge carefully to his students. Whenever he would speak, his students would have a hard time understanding what exactly he's referring to. You'd had to be a powerful mind just to understand what exactly he was referring to. Another classical example is mentioned within the Quran. The example of Nabi Musa alayhi salam. When Allah commands Musa to confront Fir'aun, Musa recognizes that his weakness, one of his weaknesses was his bayan. He wasn't able to articulate himself clearly and properly. So he turns to Allah. He says, "Wa akhi Harun, my brother Harun, he has a more eloquent tongue than I do. His expression is far more better than mine. So let him accompany me, and both of us will confront Fir'aun." In fact, Fir'aun recognizes this, and one of the reasons why he rejects the message of Nabi Musa alayhi salam, he says, "Am I not better than him? I can express myself properly." But him, Musa, لا يكاد يبين. He's not able to express his thoughts and his knowledge properly. So even amongst leadership, you realize the power of oratory, the power of eloquence and oratory, powers is quite solid. It's quite there. There's a very good relationship between a leader and him having oratory power. And this is exactly what Imam Sajjad alayhi salam is referring to. When you look towards, for example, and then you have the other dimension. The other dimension is sometimes you have a scholar, or you have a person who lacks ilm, who lacks knowledge, but his bayan is profound. You'll have a person who has very limited knowledge, but then the way he articulates himself is something so great, it captivates the minds of the people. It captivates the heart of the people. And we see this constantly everywhere. From the politicians to the speakers, everywhere. There are people who would give, for example, lectures in every different walks of life, in all different types of, all walks of life. They'll speak for an hour very eloquently, but then at the end of the hour, you'd question, what exactly did they speak about? The substance was lacking, but their bayan was incredible. When you look at leaders of society, if you just look at the history of certain nations, you have certain leaders who are known for their bayan, who are known for their fasaha, who are known for their eloquence. Amongst them, Martin Luther Jr., for example. Amongst them, Gandhi. They say they were very powerful orators of their time. That's why they were able to lead an entire movement and captivate the hearts of the people. Amongst them, Roosevelt. Amongst them, Hitler. I mean, leave aside whether they were good or bad. These political figures were able to present their ideology simply because of their oratory skills. There is a very strong link between a leader and the power of oratory. Imam Sajjad alayhi salam goes back to the basic elementary descriptions of a leader. That they have to have the oratory power which they can present to the people. When they present certain things to the people, it has to be done in a way that it brings them towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam very beautifully in Nahj al-Balagha, he says, Inna lu'amara al-kalam. He says, we are the kings of speech. If the caliphate was in our hands, through our speech, people would have come towards us. When a person has this power, and he raises himself or rises to the leader, to the capacity of leadership, he should invite the people to come towards the religion of Islam. He should speak to them on a spiritual level. He should create policies that invite people towards the religion of Islam. He should instill godly and moral values amongst the nation. Through the power of speech and eloquence, they would be able to carry out these specific objectives. It is necessary. One of the key attributes of a leader is that they have to have good, strong oratory power. Imam Sajjad alayhi salam, when he speaks to Yazid, he says, yes, you have eloquence. You have what is known as fasaha, but not to our level. And the values that you demonstrate, they move people away from Islam. Whereas us, we bring people towards the religion of Islam. Sahifa Sajjadiyya is a prime example of how the Imam is able to nurture his community. And there weren't many followers, by the way. Karbala had just taken place. The strong Shias that were there during that time, they were all slaughtered in the lands of Karbala. When the Imam comes back to the city of Medina, he starts afresh. But he does so through du'as. The dua of Imam al-Sajjad should never be forgotten, and it should be a part and parcel of our lives. When you refer to Karbala, you recognize that each and every single member of the camp of Aba Abdullah, whenever they would enter the battlefield, they would engage in poetry as well. One of the ways that they would highlight their character and identity was through lines of poetry. Abu Fadl al-Abbas, he would say lines of poetry. Aliyun al-Akbar, he would say lines of poetry. Awn and Muhammad, likewise, these were children. but they would eloquently present themselves when they would fight for the message of Abu Abdullah. And amongst them, of course, the son of Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam, Qasim. And the lines that he uses are very, very profound. Hamid ibn Muslim, he narrates, he says that when Qasim came into the battlefield, it's as if I saw or I had never seen a face so bright like the shining moon. And he was just coming towards the enemies, ready to engage in battle. And then Qasim, of course, he begins to recite these lines. He says, إن تنكروني فأنا نجل الحسن سبت النبي المصطفى المؤتمن هذا حسين كالعسير المرتهن بين أناس لا تسوق صوب المزن. It says, if you do not know who I am the son of Al-Hasan, the grandson of Rasulullah, the chosen and the most trusted. This is Abu Abdullah al-Hussein, the captive amongst you. May the mercy of the skies never rain amongst you. They say that Qasim fights, then he is killed. Abu Abdullah alayhi salam carries the body of Qasim back towards the tents. Then he places the body alongside the body of Ali al-Akbar. He sits between the body of his son and the body of the son of his brother. Then he begins to cry and lament. But Layla and Ramla are standing outside the tents. They don't have it in them to enter the tent whilst Abu Abdullah alayhi salam is in there. They are waiting patiently, but it's too long for them to wait. It's hurtful, so they turn to Zainab alayhi salam. They tell her, Ya Zainab, tell Abu Abdullah that we want to see our sons. Zainab enters, she comforts Abu Abdullah, she says, Ya Abu Abdullah, Ya ibn al-Zahra, Ramla and Layla want to see their sons. Abu Abdullah very weakly he stands, and as he leaves, Ramla enters the tent. When she sees Qasim, she embraces his body and she cries out, she laments, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Imagine Imam al-Sajjad had to witness all of this. Not only that, but witness what happened after Karbala. There's a companion by the name of Sahal ibn Sa'al al-Sa'idi. He says, I heard the news that the Qafila were coming towards Sham. So I waited outside the streets of Sham, I waited outside the gates of Sham, and I saw the Qafila approaching Sham. I saw a man in a red shirt, and I said to myself, this can't be the grandson of Rasulullah. Never have I seen the grandsons of Rasulullah wear red. But as this person came towards me, as the prisoners came towards the city, I saw this man was wearing a shirt covered in his blood. I approached him and I said to him, Yabna Rasulullah, Assalamu alaikum. Imam al-Sajjad turns to him and says, oh man, tell me who you are. All of these people, they throw rubbish and sticks and stones, but you came and gave your salams. Tell me who you are. He says, I am Sahal, one of the companions of Rasulullah. The Imam says to him, Ya Sahal, do you have some money with you? He says, Yabna Rasulullah, I do. He says, go and give it to the gods. Tell them to raise the heads of my father and uncles and cousins. tell them to raise the spears. He says, why, Ibn Rasulallah? He says, so that the people divert their eyes from my women towards these heads. Then he says, Ya Sahal, do you have a piece of cloth with you? He says, what for, Ibn Rasulallah? He says, the heaviness and the heat of the chain, it's chewing into my neck. Ya Sahal, I need this cloth for some comfort. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. سيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون. ماتم الحسين.
हुसैन या हुसैन हो तेरे तेत जिसे हुल्लाए फिरदौस अता वो शहंशाह ज़मन जिसको कफन भी न मिला 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 वो शहंशाह ज़मन जिसको कफन न मिला वो मोहम्मद का नवासा वो हुसैन इब्न अली वो मोहम्मद का नवासा वो हुसैन इब्न अली गुलशन फातिमा ज़हरा की वो मासूम कली गुलशन फातिमा ज़हरा की वो मासूम कली नाम है पंजतने पाक में बाहर पे जली हुर्मत दीन खुदा जिसकी शहादत में दली हो तेरे तेत जिसे हुल्लाए फिरदौस अता वो शहंशाह ज़मन जिसको कफन भी न मिला वो शहंशाह जिसको कफन भी न मिला वो शहंशाह कफन भी न मिला झूला जिब्रील ने बचपन में झुलाया वो हुसैन झूला जिब्रील ने बचपन में झुलाया वो हुसैन दोष पर जिसको पैगंबर ने बिठाया वो हुसैन दोष पर जिसको पैगंबर ने बिठाया वो हुसैन जिस पे कुरान के पारों का तसाया वो हुसैन पानी दिल खोल के दुश्मन को पिलाया वो हुसैन हाय उस बेक सोनादार को पानी न दिया वो शहंशाह ज़मन को कफन भी न मिला वो शहंशाह ज़मन को कफन भी न मिला वो शहंशाह भी न मिला दश्त में घेर लिया जिसको बुला कर मैं माँ दश्त में घेर लिया जिसको बुला कर मैं माँ सामने जिसके तरफ तारा अकबर सजवा सामने जिसके तरफ तारा अकबर सजवा खींच ली जिसने जवा बेटे के सीने से सीना जिसके हाथों पे हुआ कत्ल पिसर गूंज दहा आखिरी नासिर मजलूम भी जिसका न रहा वो शहंशाह ज़मन जिसको कफन भी न मिला वो शहंशाह जिसको कफन भी न मिला वो शहंशाह ज़मन कफन भी न मिला खूब रोते हैं जो अपना कोई मर जाता है खूब रोते हैं जो अपना कोई मर जाता है लाश बेवालियो वारिस का कफन पाता है लाश बेवालियो वारिस का कफन पाता है और तरस खा के उसे कोई भी दफनाता है ताज़ियत के लिए दुश्मन भी चला आता है हाय अफसोस जिगर को शाह महबूब खुदा वो शाह ज़मन जिसको कफन भी न मिला वो शहन ज़मन जिसको कफन भी न मिला वो शहंशाह भी न मिला हाय पामाल हुई लाश हुसैन इब्न अली, हाय पामाल हुई लाश हुसैन इब्न अली। भाई की लाश पे मजलूम बहन रो न सकी, भाई की लाश पे मजलूम बहन रो न सकी। लाश उरिया पे लहू चश्म फलक रोती थी, कलमा पढ़ते थे पैगंबर का और हंसते थे शकी। लाश पर जमती थी खाकोरिये देती थी सदा, वो शहंशाह ज़मान जिसको कफन भी न मिला, वो शहंशाह ज़मान जिसको कफन भी न मिला, वो शहंशाह जिसको कफन भी न मिला। परचमे हजरत अब्बास उठाने वाले, परचमे हजरत अब्बास उठाने वाले, रहे आबाद अज़ा खान सजाने वाले, रहे आबाद अज़ा खान सजाने वाले। और सलामत रहे नौहों को सुनाने वाले, गमे सरवर में है जो अश्क बहाने वाले। फातिमा ज़हरा उन्हें खुद में देती है दुआ, वो शहंशाह ज़मान जिसको कफन भी न मिला, वो शहंशाह ज़मान जिसको कफन भी न मिला, वो शहंशाह ज़मान जिसको कफन भी न मिला, वो शहंशाह ज़मान जिसको कफन भी न मिला। वो मोहम्मद का नवासा वो हुसैन इब्न अली, वो मोहम्मद का नवासा वो हुसैन इब्न अली। गुलशने फातिमा ज़हरा की वो मासूम कली, गुलशने फातिमा ज़हरा की वो मासूम कली। नाम है पंजतने पाक में बाहर पे जली, हुर्मते दीन खुदा जिसकी शहादत में दली। होते रहते थे जिसे खुल्लाए फिरदौस अता, वो शहंशाह ज़मान जिसको कफन भी न मिला, वो शहंशाह ज़मान जिसको कफन भी न मिला, वो शहंशाह ज़मान जिसको कफन भी न मिला, वो शहंशाह ज़मान जिसको कफन भी न मिला। या हुसैन, या हुसैन, या हुसैन। Hussein, Ya Hussein, wa Muhammad wa ali Muhammad salawat.
السلام عليك يا رسول الله، السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين، السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء، السلام عليك يا حسن المجتبى، السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا علي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي والحجة بن الحسن، عجل الله فرجه وسهل الله تعالى مخرجه وظهوره ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم كن لوليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا رب. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
Just a reminder, the seminar with Al-Hadi Youth will start at 10 p.m. in the main hall, 10 p.m. in the main hall. Rugby car park closes at 10:30 p.m. And can requested to be seated so tabarruk can be served. Please be seated, Sant. 10 p.m. the seminar starts, Sant.